Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Laela Sturdy, and I am the managing partner of CapitalG, which is Alphabet's growth equity investment fund. We invest in growth stage technology companies like Stripe, UiPath, Duolingo, Databricks, and a bunch of others. I am so excited to be here today. It's an extra special day for me because I'm getting the chance to talk with my dear friend and colleague, Claire Hughes Johnson. And before I introduce her, I'll give a quick logistical overview of what we're going to do today. I'm going to ask Claire for questions for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to save some time at the end for audience questions. So as you think of questions, as Claire and I are discussing things, feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure they get asked, or we'll try our best to make sure they get asked later on in the talk. So this is very personal for me because I've known Claire for more than 15 years. I worked closely with her at Google. I worked on her team. And then I invested in Stripe as an investor while Claire was the COO. So I feel like I'm kind of a guinea pig, actually, for some of the things that we're going to discuss today, which is a bunch of Claire's wisdom around leadership and scaling companies. So for those of you that don't know Claire, I'll give you a bit more of her background, which is she was the chief operating officer of Stripe from 2014 to 2021, as Stripe grew from being a small startup to one of the world's most valuable private companies. And before that, as I mentioned, she was a leader at Google, where she led a number of different businesses for Google, including work on self-driving cars, Gmail, ads, and a number of other things. Claire is also a wonderful friend, a mother, a dynamic person in the world. So hopefully we'll get to interject lots of fun stories about her and her background and dig into why we're here today, which is to talk about the book that she just wrote, which I highly recommend. I got an advance copy, so I've been able to read it myself. And the book is called Scaling People: Tactics for Management and Company Building. So we're going to dive into a bunch of the details on that. But in order to do so, I would like to introduce my esteemed guest. So Claire, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. Laela, this is such an exciting day. Congratulations.
It is. Thank you. Well, it's always exciting when we get to hang out, Claire, but it is especially wonderful to welcome you back to Google, even virtually. How does it feel to be back at Talks at Google and sharing your latest knowledge with us?
It feels amazing because I hosted some talks at Google and I never thought I'd be on the other side, even after I left. Sometimes you just still feel like you're at Google, right? And if any Googlers who I knew are on listening to the live stream, hello to all of you. I certainly miss a lot of my favorite Googlers that I worked with, Laela being one of them. So this is a great privilege to be hosted by you.
Well, we miss you as well, Claire, and I got lots of texts in advance, so I know lots of your favorites are on there, and I'm hopefully many more. Good. So, Claire, as I mentioned, I had the distinct privilege of getting to work with you, so learn directly from some of your leadership and management techniques. So I feel like I get to be a little sneaky in this interview. But we'll start with a kind of a high-level question. What made you write this book?
Yeah, Laela, you definitely experienced some of my lessons learned that I share in the book, and I'm sure we'll have feedback for me on the content, as you always have. The book was really inspired by Patrick and John Collison, the Stripe co-founders. Patrick and John started a company when they were young and sold it, and then started Stripe when they were both basically in college. And they're very, very much autodidacts. They're consuming content all the time, reading books, reading articles, talking to people. And they really felt like there wasn't a tactical book, like really specific and tactical about company building and about management. And they wanted to see some of the content that they would have benefited from in the early years of both of their companies. And I actually came to agree with them. All three of us had a chance always spend time with a lot of Stripe's users, our customers, many of whom are interesting high growth tech companies unto themselves. And, Instacart, Discord, Kickstarter, many of these, Toast. And And in doing so, the conversations would often be about these topics, like how do you do planning? How do you do goal setting? How does your executive team spend time together? What do you do when you're hiring a leader? Like it was really, and then on the management side, look, a lot of management happens behind closed doors. What does a great one-on-one look like? What is performance feedback and coaching really? How does it happen tactically in a way that benefits your team and the person? And so the book is, yes, very tactical. It has lots of examples. It has exercises and guides. And I won't say that I'm like a PhD expert in any of this, but I think, after 10 years at Google and about 8 years at Stripe, there's definitely some lessons learned that you're going to find.
Absolutely. Well, Claire, if they were giving PhDs in this, you would definitely have one, and at least an honorary degree. So that's great.
Training PhD.
I love it. I love it, and such a cool inspiration to work with some amazing founders like Patrick and John, and say this is the type of content that they would have loved to have at different stages of building Stripe. So I love that. So Claire, I was joking with you when we were talking about the book a couple of days ago that there's lots of great stories in there. And I know it's particularly interesting because you're such a literary person and love to read books yourself. And I thought it was interesting. It was a part book, part textbook. There were, there's a lot in there that is not just stories and text, but exercises, tools. Talk to us about that. What made you think that what made you decide to include that type of content?
Yeah. Here it is. It even has that sort of craft paper textbooky feel, right?
I love it.
It really, if anyone's reading it hoping it's a cover to cover novel, I have bad news. It is not something I think you should read cover to cover. It really has specific sections about whatever topic might be interesting. So look in the table of contents and pick the part that is relevant to you at that moment, whether you're interested in helping build a great company, or you're starting to manage people for the first time, or for, you've been doing it for a long time. I hope there's something for everyone. There are parts of the book, the very beginning, I think, and sort of the end, that I think sort of might be good to read. But I think otherwise you can turn to hiring, you can look at team building, you can look at performance and individual management. And generally, and obviously the beginning of the book is really about company building, operating structures, organizational structures. But textbook makes me a little nervous because, I feel like, well, I guess that's the intention. You could do some of the stuff in this book and teach yourself. So I'll take it back. I'll take it. It has a textbook-like quality. And it is going to be fun because we're going to publish online some of the PDFs of things you can do that workbook along with the doing.
I love that. And I think certainly some of the best business books that I've read, you can quickly access the content when you want, when you need it. And I thought, you see it in the table of contents in your book, the way you have it laid out. I read it cover to cover, but I could imagine people accessing it either way, going back and forth. So that's great. So let's dig into some of the lessons in the book. I'm going to start with a story, Claire, that I remember when I was working on your team. So this takes us back to about 2011, and it was your leadership offsite, and you had us do an exercise where we all had to choose from this set of cards and figure out what were our personal values and what were the personal values of the rest of our teammates. And then we all shared it with each other. And I really remember that because I thought it was such a useful exercise. I learned a lot about myself, and even more importantly, I learned more about my colleagues. And I think it really built trust that day in a really, really profound way. So I was reminded of that story as I was reading through the part of your book. It's actually, I think, in chapter 1 of the book, where you begin to outline what you see as the 4 operating principles, which I'd love to come back to. But one of them being that self-awareness is critical to building mutual awareness. So can you expand on this a bit, help everyone understand what you mean by this?
Yeah, I think a lot of management books rotate right toward the team or the organization. Like, what are you doing to manage these people and this work? And my point of view is that actually you have to start with yourself. And if you don't understand your motivations, your values, your strengths, and yes, your weaknesses, your tendencies, right? What are your work style preferences? Are you introverted? Are you extroverted? Are you more about tasks? Are you more about people? And look, we're all those things, but people do tend to gravitate in different directions. And that shows up in the workplace, right? And if you're a manager or a leader, well, one, you're an example to others. And I think you want them to be self-aware. You want them to be asking for feedback and learning about what they do well and what they need to work on. And you better have done the work yourself. And I do think, as you said, Laela, that doing some of that work, so it's sort of, this is a transition from there's yourself, there's your team, and then there's actually building a team. The more that you can create an environment in a team where people feel comfortable talking about, like, this is what's really important to me, or I like to work this way, and sort of teach each other about each other, you're going to build trust. You're going to build a more effective team. I worry sometimes that books about people and organization tend to be treated as sort of like marginal topics, when in fact, in my experience, the more effective you are at this type of work, company structures, operating structures, but also the team part, the people part, you're going to get better results. And you have to start with yourself. So building self-awareness is number one, is the most important of my personal operating principles. And then I think if you can do that, then you can build that mutual awareness in the team, which is then going to build trust, as you said. And that's going to equal fast execution. You just got to put the work in up front.
I love that as the foundation. And yeah, it's certainly to be able to work with colleagues that are also investing in self-awareness. I can imagine just multiplicative effects. So that's amazing. So let's dig into another one of your operating principles. So I also have a story from this. So I remember about the same time, so it's more than a decade ago, being in a meeting with you, and there were a bunch of sales leaders on your team, and I won't name names, but they were kind of complaining about, oh, the product team didn't ship this, and sort of saying something about a particular product leader. And you stopped the meeting and you said, have you given that person that feedback directly? And I remember like one or two people looking kind of sheepish, backing up. And clearly the answer was no. And you said, I don't want to, we're not discussing anything in here that you haven't, any feedback that you haven't given directly to that person. And again, it's funny, Claire, it was so easy for me to think of these examples as I was reading the book. That's why I felt like a guinea pig, but I really remembered that meeting. And I've used that advice and used that as, a mantra in my own life since then. So thank you, first of all. And I thought it was a good lead into your second operating principle that you talk about in the book. And that is, you describe as, quote, say the thing you think you cannot say. And then I also love this statement in the same chapter that was, leadership is the art of disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. So I thought you just wrote really well about this concept, and I've seen it, your leadership in action around giving hard feedback. So can you just share more about how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think say the thing you think you cannot say is partially about that. It's exactly that. Give the feedback. Don't be sitting there with your brain going, 100 miles an hour thinking, I can't believe they're saying that they're going to get this delivered in the next month. I know they're not, You've got to figure out a way. This actually came conceptually, and then I think I evolved it from Fred Kaufman, who wrote Conscious Business, which I really do recommend, has this concept of this left-hand column, which is, you're in an interaction. We're in an interaction right now, and we're thinking things, and you're sort of filtering, right? You're filtering all the time. And I think some of that filtering is obviously socially appropriate and the right thing to do. But there's a level, especially I think people who are managing, over filter and don't think, and Fred would say you need to detoxify it, like make it a more constructive statement. My favorite trick is to make it a question, right? And sort of say, let's say we're talking about someone having an overly ambitious roadmap on the product. And as the salesperson, like, I don't think I'm going to see that product in 2 months. And you're telling me, you say, well, what's your confidence level on delivering that in the next 2 months? And they're, no. Say, well, here's my data point from the last 2 of these. Like you add information, you say, can you are you really that confident? And I think someone will think, they're making a good point. Maybe I haven't delivered the last two commitments I made, and I think that's constructive feedback, but it's also dialogue about the real work. Like, what is really going on? Don't be operating up here all the time. You got to get real with people. And I think you can't have a breakthrough conversation if someone doesn't take a little bit of a risk and say the thing they think they can't say. That could also be true in a meeting, where everyone's sort of thinking, is there this topic that we're not talking about that's like actually the problem? Be the person in the meeting who asks the question and say, I feel like we're not talking about this customer issue or whatever you think is actually the problem. That to me, and I mean, many times, especially at Stripe, when I got more confident and comfortable, I felt like I could accelerate having what I call the real conversation, either in a meeting or with people, by trying to cut, but very constructively, to the heart of what I was observing. And the key is I'm owning it. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying to the product person, you never deliver on your roadmap and you never will. Like, I'm saying, hey, are you really confident in that? Because here's my experience.
Yeah.
And I think that, and then here's what's happened to me when I've tried to tell customers information that I've been undermined, right? Like, and I think that creates the real conversation. The other part that you're pointing out, which I do mention in some of the same parts of the book, which is like leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb, is actually more to me about the third operating principle, which is distinguishing between leadership and management, which I don't think I did early in my career. And I now have come to really respect are quite different skills. But I think it's a cop-out when people say, well, I'm a better manager or I'm a better leader. Quite a lot of founders will say, oh, well, I've got these leadership skills and other people can do the management. And I do agree that you probably innately spike in one or the other. But as your career progresses, which I hope this book helps people's career progress, you really have to learn both. And you have to learn to get uncomfortable in whatever side you're not as comfortable. It doesn't mean you're going to be, a Jedi master, but I really think that's sort of what I tried to say. As I went to Stripe, I realized I'd been doing more management, which is stable, predictable, match the talent with the work, set milestones, set metrics, measure progress. And leadership is about turning up the heat. It's about making people uncomfortable. It's about setting a vision that maybe is not achievable, but that's where the disappointing people part comes. Like, you almost become this iconic embodiment of this vision, of this idea, especially for founders, right? And that's actually kind of hard. Like, you've set yourself up almost as on a bit of a pedestal, or as the guide up the mountain. And you're a human being, and you may have set a goal that was a little unreasonable. But actually, say your goal was, we're going to get, to 200 customers. Maybe it's a small company, and you get to 150 and everyone thought you were going to have 50 or 100. Like, that's amazing. But, there is a disappointment in, like, we didn't get to 200. But I think that leadership, you actually have to, it's a much more, for me, uncomfortable practice, setting very high bars, very high ambitions, very big dreams and visions, and not always seeing the path to get there.
I love that. Yeah, no, you said something really interesting, so much interesting stuff in there, but the idea that we all need to have a bit of both. What has, in your experience, which has been harder? Is it the innate leaders that you have to teach to manage, or vice versa? And who's your book speaking to?
One of my favorite stories in the book, which is I interviewed, I also did not just take my experience. I interviewed a bunch of different, mostly sort of CEO or founder types, but from a lot of different industries. So from publishing, the editor-in-chief of The Economist, Dominique Crenn, who was the first woman to get 3 Michelin stars.
I wish you would have included some food when I saw that.
I know. I wish I'd gone out. It was during the pandemic, so we did not get to go out to dinner. Yes. But I interviewed Reid Hoffman, who I think is well known as the founder of, one of the founders of LinkedIn, and the chairman, but also someone who cares a lot about scaling, right? He has this whole Masters of Scale podcast, whatever. Reid and I are talking about his early career. And he says to me, I had a guy who I'd hired to help with operations on a small company that Reid had founded before LinkedIn. And at one point they were having a pretty heated discussion about not executing on their plan. And because Reed had set out a vision and he'd said a lot of ideas. And the guy said, you know what? I wouldn't hire you to manage a McDonald's. And Reed was like, I wouldn't hire me either. Tell me what to do. You know, but Reed in that moment.
Self-awareness he got, at least. Yeah.
The self-awareness. The other thing that I loved is that Reed has a kind of operating principle of his own, or even a value of very open and transparent feedback. And he said that he thinks one of the keys to his career is creating environments where people were comfortable saying to their boss, I wouldn't hire you to, you know, run a McDonald's. Or, by the way, I think it's actually harder to run a McDonald's than people realize. But point is, I think that for me, as I said, the management part came much more naturally. I'm more of an execution. I'm a planner. Like, I like to get things done. I just get very motivated by checking stuff off the list. And
she has a big list for all the listeners there, as we all know.
Yes, Laela knows this. I will sort of track progress. I would say actually Google. I'll tell you a Google story, which is I once had someone at Google say to me, you know, you've made it in your career when you have 2 bosses. And I sort of had like 3 bosses at one point when I was in the AdWords organization.
Crushing it.
I was crushing it, clearly. I had so many bosses. Anyway, it's not meaning to brag. But I had the situation where I was fairly newly the leader of this global team. And but we had been forming, I thought, really well. Like and somewhat challenging because some had been my colleagues, and then I was leading the team. But I thought we were making progress. And members of my team, we sort of had a back-to-back occasion where they were presenting to me on their plans, and then they were presenting to one of my dotted line other bosses, essentially. And they brought their A game to the other meeting. So I'm their direct manager. I am the leader of the team, and the presentations that happened in the room, the amount of preparation, the amount of work that had been done was just casual. It wasn't actually at their highest level. Like, I knew them enough to know, like, you're not bringing your A game. And then literally like the next day in front of an unnamed person who, I'll admit, was an intimidating leader at Google.
Yeah.
They brought their A game. And I had a huge wake up call where I was like, I have been managing this team, but I have not been leading it. I have not been setting a standard, an expectation. I have not, frankly, been critical when people haven't met my standard. I haven't been honest about it. And I think I changed a little bit that day. And I think when I got to Stripe, it was very rewarding to me that in our engagement survey, we would ask, you know, does your manager hold your work to a high standard? And I think at Google, my score on that was like sort of variable. And at Stripe, it was very high. And because really what great management and leadership is like very high standards, but also very deep devotion. And I think I got the devotion part, but leadership is a lot about the standards.
Absolutely.
And so you're probably on one of those better than the other. And your goal, any of you watching, is how do you balance the standards and the devotion?
I love that. Well, that's a wonderful story. And I mean, I'm struck by also just your openness, as you always are, Claire, but the commitment to learning and the commitment to getting better, which I you know, is probably the obvious undercurrent of your entire book, and why you would even want to write something like this. But that's great.
That's Laela, no one's actually said that yet, but you're right. It is about learning. And I care about learning. My parents are teachers.
The pace of learning, I think, is something that you really stand out on, which is incredible. Well, Claire, we've gone through three of the main operating principles. So I would love to learn a little bit about the final one that you talk about in the book, which you phrase as come back to your operating system. And I think that's a lot of where I see a lot of your operating genius come out, the systems, the clarity, the like, let's make sure we know where the train's going and that it's also running on time. So share with us a little bit more about what you think is key under this principle.
Yeah, this come back to your operating system. And there's like a whole chapter of the book devoted to building an operating system for your team, for yourself, for hopefully an organization, if you're in that position. For me, actually came about, Laela, which you've seen in action, which is I started to manage multiple teams at Google, and I started to have to manage really different teams. And that that was and that was sort of good preparation for going and being a COO of Stripe, which is like, I am not just leading a sales team or an operations team or an engineering or product team. I have to really context switch a lot. And I came to realize that in order for me to do that effectively, I had to build commonality in how I actually did the mechanisms of teams, right? Which, by the way, Google has some of this. OKRs are a common structure that is used throughout the company. And I was using that, but I needed more than that, right? I needed sort of like, okay, we're going to establish why this team exists. We're going to have our OKRs, but we're also going to have a metrics that matter, like which I would call, like your dashboard. We're going to have a weekly review of that. We're going to have a way of tracking our progress, not just on OKRs, but just like on the work of the team beyond getting the work done, but also developing the team. Because often at Google, at Stripe, there's like doing your day job, and then there's building for the thing that you're going to need to do 6 months later. Mm-hmm. And I think like what I say in the book is like being in a high growth environment is just like playing a video game on hard mode. And I actually think that really pushed me to like, how do you operate at multiple levels and build a system to do that, a day-to-day level and a week-by-week and quarter-by-quarter level, but also I'm seeing around a corner level, which by the way, got challenged at Stripe and I did not do perfectly because it is hard mode. I definitely died on a few levels, but I would say that I think that, I think that's what I mean about the operating system, which is and I make some suggestions on what that might look like. It's very tactical, right? It's like, here's the rhythm of how you get the work done and what you review and who you review it with. But I think that is getting the work done, building that rhythm, and then being able to switch between different teams in different stages. You can still use that rhythm to make progress. And that's the point of that operating principle of mine. Because you have to, like we talk about scaling companies, you have to scale yourself.
Absolutely.
And I don't know any other way to do it. Yeah. I got to build a system.
Well, I know I loved reading that part of the book because I know working with so many founders, which is what I do in my day job now. And they are desperate for that type of specific blueprints and experience and what's worked elsewhere. And in a lot of these ways, there's not a need to completely reinvent the wheel, but to learn from great operators like yourself who have seen companies at different points in their journey of growth. And you can learn a lot from that. So that's great. So I want to move to another part of the book, which is a chapter I really enjoyed, on the intentional team development. Mm-hmm. And I loved how much time you spent on this topic, because I think, especially in hyperscale companies, when I hear about them, a lot of people are just talking about hiring, getting people in the door, which is sort of...
There's a very long chapter on hiring for that reason, Laela.
Exactly. And the game hasn't even begun, so to speak. You just have your roster when that's happening. But you talk about a bunch of, the specifics around reorganizations, layering, the importance of offsites, like all of the things that you've done and you've learned to tools and practices to really be intentional about the culture and the team. And I have to admit, I was inspired as I was reading it. And then I was like, wow, Claire, I know these companies you were working at well. We were working together at Google. I know Stripe really well as an investor. And you were working at, during the phases that you were leading these organizations, some of the fastest growing teams and technology companies of all time. And it was hair on fire a lot of the time. And so much, just so much to be done, busy, no time to do it. So when I was reading those recommendations, like, you're like, is there really enough time to do it? Did you really do all of this, Claire? So tell us, how do you make time? And were you really doing all of these things in the hyper growth periods when you were a leader? Or do you wish you were? And that's why you're sharing this with us.
Okay, that's fair. Was I doing all of them at once? Probably not. But honestly, and I say this actually at the end of the hiring chapter, as I was finishing that chapter, I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, some founder is going to read this and think, is this woman insane? Like, how do you do all of these things? Yeah. But if talent is everything, your hiring process is everything. And then the next step is your team development process, right? Yeah. And so I guess I would say it is incredibly important to, find product market fit and start to scale your product and your business. But guess what? It is equally important, in my opinion, once you've got that piece, to pay that same attention to your company structures, your operating mechanisms, and your people.
Yep.
Because I mean, my ambition has always been to build an enduring company. And when I say enduring, I don't mean 10 years, I mean 100. Yeah. And like, there aren't that many companies in the world, in the United States, that have been around for over 100 years. And I think, and that was one of the reasons a long time ago, I joined the board of Hallmark, because I was like, this is fascinating. Like, what company can endure and still actually be involved? The founder family is still involved in Hallmark, but like, it is a fascinating, you know what it is? They have an incredibly powerful culture. They really invest in their people, and they have a very strong attitude to improve how they operate and what their business is, you know. And I think that like Hallmark bought Crayola, smart move, well ahead of when you'd think Crayola was a big deal. And even though that's not a company in tech, I see them making the investments that I think tech companies need to make. So I really believe in it. I think it leads, you know, there's the Bill Walsh book, The Score Takes Care of Itself, right? I really think the score starts to take care of itself if you make the right foundational investments. Now, of course, the question is, in what order and when, and can you do them all at once? No. You have to set priorities. You have to think about what stage you're at, what bandwidth you have. But I think for anyone in a leadership or management role, if you're looking at because time is your most valuable resource. If you're looking at any week in front of you and you don't think you have the right mix of activities, meaning you should be spending time with customers, in my opinion. You should be spending time on anticipating the next thing you're going to need in your product and in your business. And you should also be spending time with your team and on your foundations. And that balance is where I really think people get out of whack. It's almost like you're riding a bike and then you think the bike is going to keep moving without you pedaling. And no, in fact, you're going up a hill.
Yeah.
And you are not just going to stop. You're going to fall down the hill at some point. And I think you see companies have these crises, right, Laela? You've seen it.
Yeah.
Where they haven't put the foundational stuff in place, the rhythms of work, and it starts to fall over. Absolutely. And so it's like a Jenga tower. I don't know. So yes, I do expect people to do this. And you mentioned one of my secrets to doing this, which is offsites, which is take time out of your day-to-day grind. And time, by the way, could be 3 hours. I'm not talking, it doesn't have to be all day. You don't even, everyone jokes with me that I'm so cheap. I don't even go off-site. I do it on-site, but I like go to a different part of the building. This is probably more pre-pandemic, but you know, you go somewhere that's a little different and you block out the time to do the work of making the foundations for the work, including the team connection.
Completely. Well, Claire, you should feel happy to know you've passed along your love of offsites to me. My particular favorite one that you ever took me on was when we went to the horse stables and had to try to move the horses around the stables to, you know, build trust among the leadership team.
This is a big joke. The Stripe team is like, when do we get to go talk to the horses?
I mean, come on. I can't believe they haven't got to go talk to the horses. I don't know. That's
you are definitely a guinea pig, Laela, for some of my more out there team.
Well, I'm scaling all your stuff, Claire.
By the way, folks watching, we're like, why are they talking about horses? Horses are prey animals. They have incredibly high sensitivity to, are they in a safe environment? Can they trust the people or the other horses they are around or the environment they're in? As Laela and I discovered, the horses will run away if your team is falling apart.
It's so true. And it was amazing what they could do. They could tell who the hierarchical leader is. They could tell who, you know, the heart of the team was. It's incredible. So we'll have to follow up in links with our horse recommendations following this discussion. But that was one of the many very meaningful offsites and that you organized, Claire. So I loved that part of the book as well. Another part, this is the only part I'm going to go to a page number, not just a chapter, but on page 326 of the book, you dig into a lot of what we were just talking about around the importance of creating an environment. It's not just about hiring well, but also building an environment that retains and fosters great talent. I think you said something like that in the book. Yeah. And you were really thoughtful around the topic, which I know is really important to, I'm sure many of the leaders listening to this talk, of diversity and inclusion and how to build diverse and inclusive teams and workplaces. So can you share a bit more about why you believe so much in this and, you know, tips you can share with people listening?
Yeah, I definitely can. And why I believe in it is because it gets better results. So diversity to me, we go back to the first operating principle. You got to build the self-awareness. And if you have the self-awareness, then you got to look at your team and you got to say, who is complementary to me on this team? Because the biggest mistake that managers and team builders make is they hire people who are just like them. And I don't just mean their socioeconomic or their racial background. I'm talking about even how they work, right? Their skills, their strengths. And that is not going to be a high performing team. A homogenous team will, in fact, move more quickly without a lot of team building involved because they have a common information effect. But if you invest in inclusion of a team that is more diverse, you're essentially opening up the aperture of the experiences and the contributions of that group. And there's really good research that a diverse team that has inclusive practices will perform 3 to 5x a homogenous team. Now, a diverse team that doesn't have inclusive practices will often underperform, right? Because they don't have a lot of common information. You've got to build those foundations, those shared expectations, shared processes. You know, anyone, I mean, Laela, you and I have probably been the only woman in the room in a lot of situations. And I sometimes think that's an advantage because at least when we talk, we sound different. But I think really it's about how do I feel that I'm on at least a level enough playing field that I can participate in this room equally. And not everybody will feel that way. And guess what? Good management is inclusive practices. It is making sure everybody participates. It is doing a level set at the beginning about the expectations. Why are we meeting? What is expected of the people in this meeting? It's also celebrating when someone disagrees with you or with someone else. You know, these are just good management practices, and that's what gets great results. I was really actually interested. There's this study that was done of intensive care units at hospitals, which all tend to be fairly similar. And the teams tend to have a diversity of background, but there's doctors, there's nurses, there's also sort of orderlies, people who, because your intensive care means constant monitoring, right, of patients. And there's a huge team. And in the study, the intensive care units that had the most inclusive practices, and in particular where doctors were really listening to every member of the team, had 18% fewer deaths. Wow. Like they're like literally saving lives because they're managing well. And so I think my DEI point of view is less about specific special programming related to, though I think that can have a really important place, and more about just step back. And those words have almost become in diversity, equity, those words have become a little meaningless. Diversity is people unlike you who make you better if you listen and learn from each other. And equity is creating a level set of expectations. And inclusion is smart management practices, right? It's making implicit things explicit. Like if there's a job opportunity on your team open, a project for someone to do not just tap someone on the shoulder. Make it known to the team. Let people raise their hand. Figure out a way to make opportunities available. And by the way, when you don't select someone for that opportunity, give them the feedback. Say the thing you think you cannot say. Here's why you weren't ready. Here's what you can do to be ready next time. And I just don't think enough of that is done. And that's where you don't see companies advancing. I don't think you see people feeling connected to their immediate team or to their company.
I love that.
And I don't think in today's world, you can just like not do that, you know?
Completely. The stakes are too high. I mean, that ICU room.
People could die. There you go.
That is incredible.
I mean, not at Stripe, hopefully.
I love the idea that inclusive management practices are just good management practices. So something that we all should and can aspire to. That is great. So I'm going to tell another little Claire story as a transition. So again, this goes back. I have so many, Claire. I have so many. Get scared. So this was again a decade plus back where I was going. This was before I started working on Claire's team, but I knew I was about to, and we had a one-on-one. And she had this office on the second floor, this glass office in this important building at Google where all the top-notch business leaders were. And I was waiting outside the office to meet with her, and I saw her with this huge screen talking into it, and probably how people are looking at me right now, actually. So similar, but it was a little stranger back then. And I thought, what is this woman doing? Is she like a CNN anchor or something? I have no idea. So anyway, I go into the one-on-one, and I said, we talked about some other stuff. And then I said, Claire, I'm just curious, what were you doing? And you told me, you said, well, every week I record a video message that I send out of a global team and in all offices all over the world. And I record this message on things going on, important things for people to be focused on. It's just a way that I found that they stay more connected to me and the team stays more connected overall. So another one of the little arrows I then put in my, satchel, Claire, of things you've taught me. And I thought, wow, that's such a good idea. It's so simple. But I don't know anybody else that's doing that. So when I read your
we have to say this was before a lot of social media.
Totally. It was not.
I was not recording
into their screens as much as we are now. This was like, even video conferencing. People barely did. This is back when you used to walk and talk to people. Imagine that. So getting a video was, it was a novel idea. I hadn't heard of it up until then. That the leader
of. It's funny. I don't think I even talk about this in the book. I do talk about managing global teams.
I didn't see it in the book there. I was wondering why more of my anecdotes didn't.
I should have talked to you before.
Yeah, exactly. Addendum. I'd send them out. I'll PDF this for everyone. Kidding, of course. But the message that I thought was really great, Claire, and why I share that, again, that personal story, and you have a lot of other great examples in your book, is that you really do stress the importance of communication and internal communication in particular. So why?
Yeah, I think, well, thank you. And you're reminding me, of some past practice. What's really funny is when I was interviewing with John and Patrick Collison, they were like, can we see some of those videos? And I was like,
oh, did they? Great. I'm going to go next time I see them.
And they were not, by the way, you made it sound like a good production. It was not a good production. It was like poor, someone holding up their iPhone. But anyway, I think, especially with a global team and the time zones, and the fact that email is just not that efficient for some things, and you can't connect to someone by reading always. Maybe the greatest writers in the world, you can, but yeah, communication to me gets a short shrift in early stage companies in particular. Like you sort of get past maybe Dunbar's number, right? 150 people, and not everybody knows each other as well. They don't know what everyone's up to. And if you don't start investing in communication structures, you are going to, again, fall over in some way. And it's hard because that is leadership time. It takes time to think about messages, to record those videos, to write those emails, to hold those all hands. But that is how you are keeping everyone, again, on the same page and connected to the company and to you. And they'll start to not have clarity of priority. They'll start to not know, what matters. And by the way, what you talk about signals what matters. Every single thing we do at Stripe, we talk about a customer. And in our operating principles, users first is our number one. And it has been literally stack ranked number one. And if you don't show that in all your choices with how you communicate internally, you're really kind of undermining the operating principle that you allegedly have, right? I think the worst thing a company can do is say they're one thing and then do the opposite. And so I think that investing in some communication structures, and I talk about this in the book, there's a lot of different choices you can make. And honestly, the reality, Laela, this is, people who work at a company are just like consumers. They don't all like information in the same way. Some people like to go to an all hands meeting. Some people like to watch a video. Some people want to read an email, and you need to figure out a way to start repeating important information.
Yep.
For those who worked with Jonathan Rosenberg when he was at Google, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer was one of his mantras. And it's real. And it starts earlier than you think. That is the main. It's a part of your job as a leader. Go back to your calendar and look, am I communicating important information on a regular basis, not just to your team, but widely? And if you're not, you're probably not doing your job.
I love that. Yes, I think that that is very good advice. Very good advice. So, Claire, I promised we have an active and excited audience out here listening. So I promised I would save some time to bring in a few audience questions, and then maybe I'll close at the end with one final question for you. So we are going to start here from Anna. And the question is, Claire, love what you said about self-awareness as a foundation. How much convincing did you have to do with your CEO, other senior leaders on this? And how did you do it?
You know, I mean, maybe part of why I joined Stripe was that I didn't have to do that much convincing. I think that, but I think what it looks like when you have to do that is to, you know, these things are always one step at a time. I'm not saying let's spend 2 years on a journey of self-awareness. I'm saying, hey, at our next offsite, can we take 2 hours and kind of take ourselves out of the day-to-day and do an exercise? And there's a lot of great stuff online. There's companies, I talk about them in the book. You know, I'm not as much a fan of Myers-Briggs, but there's Myers-Briggs, there's DISC, there's Discovery Insights, there's the Enneagram, right? But like find some tool. There's the Big Five personality test, which has some good research behind it in terms of effectiveness of prediction of management ability, and have people take some kind of, because people love data, by the way, a lot of CEOs and founders love data. So start with something that gives the group data about themselves, about each other, and then facilitate a discussion. And guess what? Most people like to talk about themselves and like to learn something new about them. And what happens is it sparks dialogue if you've set the right environment where someone says, yeah, I've noticed that. Like when you get under stress, you tend to do this thing. And then people are like, really? And what is that like? Because, you know, you're just holding up mirrors to each other. So I think get someone to pilot it, try it, make it data-driven, make it constructive. Don't make it too long, right? And then also see if you can get people to reflect at the end of that day. Because what I find is if you do that early in a day, Laela, you know, at the end, people will say, that was a really effective day we had. And it's because you started with a really powerful connection exercise. But there has to be someone who is brave enough to say, let's try this. And I invite those of you on here, be that person. And I think too often we look to like by the way, no young company has an HR team, but you look to like the HR team to come with this stuff. And to me, you should be coming with that stuff.
I love that. I love that. I completely agree, by the way, that the data, giving people data on some of these exercises just gets them excited. They share it. And I also completely agree that helping develop that connection, that self-reflection, awareness, and then getting to the harder stuff can be a wonderful way to sequence.
And obviously don't share anyone's data if they're not comfortable, but most people will start to get comfortable and then say, but you can always share like a team map, or you can talk about yourself. But yeah, no, I think that's
Claire Johnson, terms and conditions is opt-in on the data side.
You gotta opt in.
Love it. Love it.
No dark arts of the internet.
Exactly. All right. I think we have the next question from Lizzie, which is, how do you hold people to high standards if they repeatedly cite reasons, excuses why they didn't perform, even if they originally said the work and the ask was reasonable and doable?
Well, this is almost verbatim out of a part of the book when I talk about identifying a low performer. Because if there is an one-time extraneous thing happened, maybe it was a personal thing, maybe it was another project, like, of course you're going to be empathetic as a colleague or a manager. But if there is any kind of repeated pattern of you setting an expectation jointly, you are going to get this work done, and then it is not done, that is low performance. And so that's a longer answer than we have time for, but you are then going to embark on the kind of conversation, and I outline this in the book, where you say to someone, I just want to observe to you, and you could be very specific. These 2 things didn't happen, these 3, even though we'd agreed. And I'm worried that you're not meeting expectations. I'm worried that I'm disappointed. And I'm worried that you're not, frankly, contributing as a level of a team member that we need to succeed on our work. Like, this is where you have to say the hard thing. But someone really needs to be held accountable in that situation, in my opinion. And then like there's all kind of situations that could be going on with individuals, and you need to open the door for them to share that. And sometimes there's appropriate support mechanisms for them. But I even say this, Laela, which is sometimes people do need to take a leave or they need something to change in their life, but you shouldn't stop holding them accountable. You should say, well, I'm going to have to move this work to someone else.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
You got to get the work. You got to be supportive of them and empathetic, but hold them accountable and get the work done. And I think that early in my career, I was just too forgiving. It goes back to the high standards. And who else wants to be on a team where the manager sort of makes excuses for the team members that don't pull their weight?
Yep.
No one wants to be on that team.
Absolutely. I think what's great about what you just said, and also what clearly comes through in your book, is that you can do both. You can be empathetic and caring towards individuals and supportive, and you can be clear about the standards and hold people to that level of accountability. And especially with young managers, I do think that's an important skill to learn.
And I also think there's in a team, there's some public metrics and goal setting. Yeah. And if someone's got to stand up in a meeting and say, my goal is red, and why, you in that room have to really help them explain that to the rest of their team. And for most people that having that experience a few times, it helps them either realize this isn't the right job for me, or, they come to you because they know they have a performance issue. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's great. All right. Well, we probably have time for one more audience question here from Corin. And that is, how do you influence without authority, but situationally, to encourage inclusive management practices?
Absolutely. So a lot of inclusion, by the way, just like good management, people think management is talking and telling people what to do. Management is listening and observing, right? And I think that anyone in the room can do that. You can be a good listener and you can observe dynamics in the room. And one of the things that I think is the most effective thing to do, as I said, is, if you are in a group that is making a decision and 5 of the 6 people in the group have participated in the decision, either written up a point of view or said a point of view, and someone hasn't, any one of those 5 people, I feel, has a responsibility to turn to that 6th person and say, Laela, do you have a point of view on this decision? Or I didn't hear from you and I'd like to. Now, of course, that feels risky because you don't want to put people on the spot. And I think a lot of the reasons we aren't inclusive sometimes is that we're afraid of putting people on the spot. And you absolutely should be constructive on how you don't call people out, but it's more about, I'd love to hear from you, or do you have anything to add? Or I've heard a lot from Tom. I've not heard as much from Laela. Laela, do you agree with where we're headed here? Right? Like, you're just checking in. You're just saying, hey, and that doesn't have to be the manager. Honestly, I've observed a lot, even on Zoom, you can see when someone clearly isn't quite with the thing, and they're not speaking up, and they probably don't quite feel comfortable. And if someone were to just ask their opinion and demonstrate to others, hey, I noticed we haven't heard from you. I'd love to know what you think. That can set a fabulous example. And I think there are a lot of versions of that. And there's versions of, or even, I mean, I think Laela, I've thought about this actually in my career, like when you get tapped on the shoulder with the special assignment,
We've both got a lot of those special assignments, Claire.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's like a hospital pass, right? But which I learned from my Irish friends, you can look it up. But I think you can say, oh, did you open this up to the team? Or why me?
Yeah.
Or, is there I think some people might not do that for their own ambition reasons, but I actually think if you want to be in a healthy team, it's better to have transparency on extra work that's getting awarded and why. For everybody, including you, because it can feel uncomfortable, right? If all of a sudden you're running around with this, and so I think just being inquisitive.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a great suggestion. All right. Well, I'm gonna switch it back to ask maybe just one or two final wrapping up moderator questions here, Claire. And one of them is this, which is I've noticed even before your book came out several times over the last year that the Working with Claire document has gone viral on the internet, which I also am wondering as a guinea pig for some of those lessons, whether the royalties are going to come my way or anyone who's worked on your team.
Any of the early
early
guinea pigs.
Beta testers of Working with Claire.
By the way, I think it's gone viral in a very specific corner of the internet, Laela, that you and I might.
It's viral in our circles, Claire. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. So I would love for you to share, because I just think it's a really cool concept that clearly, at least in these circles of the internet that we hang out in, Claire, people are finding very valuable. So what is a Working with Claire or Working with Laela document?
Yeah.
Why do you think it resonates so strongly with managers and employees?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to me. It actually came from Google, by the way, which is when Google started to award a Great Manager Award. I don't know if they still do. I had the fortune of moderating the panel of the winners a few times to share best practices with an audience, but with each other. And one of them brought up that Urs, has a user reference manual, I think is what he calls it, which I actually didn't read at the time. I don't think I've read it, but they said they'd written their own for their team. So credit to, I'm sorry, I don't remember the Googler's name, but credit to them. I went back to my desk and I was like, that really is kind of a smart idea. Because I think it's an accelerant, right? Like people get anxious when they're first working with someone. And if you can just sort of expose, again, you have to be self-aware to pull this off, but like, what do I think it's like, what do I like to be pinged about? What do I like to how do I structure one-on-ones? When do I want to be told X or Y? Like it's a lot about tactical, but also how do I make decisions? How do I treat data? How will I, what should you share with me about your team if you're managing someone who's a manager, right? And so I wrote a draft and I shared it. Laela, you might have been an early recipient.
I was going to say, I'm going to go back in my internet archive and see if I can find it.
It was a Google Doc. It was an early Google Doc. Yeah. But I shared it with some people who were close with me for feedback because I wanted it to feel accurate. Like never worked with me. I have to like hang out with me a lot. But anyway, the point is, I got good feedback. I revised some of it. Maeve, who was my admin at the time, who still works with me in some capacities, right, which is exciting, was like, you know what, you don't talk about like the main thing about you. And I was like, the main thing? What is the main thing? She said, you just like good crack, which is Irish for like humor, laughter. But like, it's true. I don't really enjoy, you saw it on this, I don't really enjoy having a long interaction, whether that's a meeting or a one-on-one, where there isn't some humor or some laugh or something where you just enjoy your time as humans. Anyway, so I had to add in some content at Maeve's behest. But I will just say that I think it took off when Elad, who was also a Google product manager, but Elad Gill wrote High Growth Handbook for Stripe Press, and he interviewed me. So I'm a chapter in his book, and this is you can find this online, in various forms. And I described working with Claire, and he said, well, can you just share it with me? And I was like, why would you want it? And he said, oh, Claire, we have to publish this. It's going to be catnip for founders. I was like, really? But really, people do like to see examples. Yeah. They do like, some guy tweeted at me yesterday. Actually, I think he must be in Latin America, mostly in Spanish, but he published his working with guide on Twitter. He screenshotted it, and he credited me, but he lifted whole portions of mine, but then he added his own content. But it was really interesting to see his interpretation of like what I had said that he was going to keep and what he wanted to add.
He aspirationally wanted to be you, Claire.
I don't know. It's not plagiarism if you give credit, right? Anyway, now I would be happy if someone wants to copy it.
I love that.
I think it's a good practice. I think you have to be self-aware and get feedback. Don't, I think there's a version of it that could be bad, which is like, here's who I think I am, and you're not. But the best thing that happened, I'll just end with this, is when I started to share it at Stripe, a bunch of people who were on my team wrote their own. Like, you don't have to be a manager, and shared it back with me. And we immediately, talk about team building and trust. We immediately had shared some of that initial information that sort of humans want when they're building a relationship and to build trust as a team. And it was great. It was a great moment, actually, in my early Stripe career. So who knows? Who knew?
What a nice arc to end. We began with self-awareness and the bridging that into team awareness and trust building. And I think this last example is just another great one, Claire. So it is such a privilege to know you as a person and a friend, Claire, and you are an operator and an executive that we all admire. So thank you for sharing so many wonderful, both, tactical, personal, strategic pieces of advice here. Highly recommend everyone run out to the stores when it's available to buy Scaling People, Tactics for Management and Company Building. And we're so happy for you, so proud of you, Claire. And thanks for coming back and spending time with us.
Oh, thank you, Laela. And as I say in the book, your career success makes me the most rewarded of everything. So I'm thrilled to reconnect with you and do this. And thank you to everyone at Google for hosting me.
Thank you.